First of all, I'd like to offer my sincere appreciation to ILSI-INDIA and CIMSANS for inviting me over here. I also like to express my appreciation for those great talks given throughout the day, and you great audience. There was a great exchange of information, and I think I learned a lot about India. I'm very grateful that I had this opportunity. What I'd like to do in the next 15 minutes is to introduce to you the experience that I had in California. And the topic given to me was climate change in long-term water resources planning. Then I added California case. The reason I add that to the California case is I like to have this discussion go a little beyond the abstract and maybe in actual practical terms. And perhaps the second reason is I'm more familiar with what goes on in California. So with that excuse, I modify the title somewhat. And I learned there's a lot of similarity between the hydrology and hydraulics and water issues and problems between India and California. And I'll try to point that out as we move along. California hydrology is wet in the northern part of the state, very dry and desert, basically in the southwestern part of the state. And the population as of today is about 38 million people. That's the most populous state in the United States. And the cities are located along the beautiful coast of California, all San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego. They are all located away from the water source. So you got to take the water somehow to those people living along the coast. So is the most productive Central Valley, California. They are again away from the water source, especially the San Joaquin Valley, which is located don't want to point at you. Oh, it's turned off. Okay, thank you. That's the San Joaquin Valley about that location. Very similar to what I learned, the Punjab and Haryana region, groundwater overdraft. So back in 1930s, the federal government got into California and built federal project to curb the groundwater overdraft. So before, the problem was tremendous back then. The whole land surface was subsiding. And I have some pictures of it, and I don't have it with me here at the moment. So it did curb the overdraft and the ground surface subsidence problem back then. We still have issues on it. So, and just like the rivers in India, Indus, Ganges, and what's the name of the third one? I think, Brahmaputra. It's fed by the high elevation Himalayan regions. In California, east end of the state, mostly that part, that's more like a high elevation, 13,000 feet, which is close to 4,000 meters. So it's maybe half of the biggest height, in the Himalayan region. We don't have glaciers, but we rely on snowpack. Snowpack provides about a third of the runoff in the state of California. Climate change, the main point is warming air. And that's a known fact. You know, various speakers spoke to that effect this morning and throughout this afternoon. As for the precipitation, the jury is out. We don't know it's going to be wet or dry. So there's one thing you can count on in terms of climate change. It's going to get warmer. And actually, it has warmed up already for the last few decades. So what's going to happen to snow? A lot of great discussions and presentations were made. Similar situation in California. We've been trying to make a good assessment on the vulnerability on the water resources in the state of California and ways to mitigate or curb the impacts of climate change. California, if you take the state as a nation, it's number 8 largest economy in the world. So it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, number 8, $1.8 trillion. As a state, in terms of agricultural production, the farm cash receipt is about $40 billion. It's number one in the union again. And it's a very important part of California economy, the agricultural production. Crop production is about 15% of the total the cash receipt in the United States, and livestock and its products are about 7%. And if you average all that out, 11% of the farm cash receipts of the whole United States is coming out of California. So it's not just a high-tech state, it's an agricultural state also. I sort of mentioned that. We'll go on. India is an important export partner for California farm products. It's number 7, $360 million in 2011. So that up to number 6, you read those states and the countries. So that's where California stands. Water development. Water has been developed over the course of last about 100 years. 100 years probably is nothing compared to the history that India has, but considering the fact that California got into statehood only for 150 years, 100 years is a long time for Californians. So the main task is to move water from high Sierra, those high elevation, to the cities. So first, the municipalities, they sort of started out extracting water out of the ground. And the city of Los Angeles built this Los Angeles aqueduct. Then San Francisco built another aqueduct, try to get that water from the high Sierra. And another local entity built that. It goes on. Then that's when I talked about earlier, that's the San Joaquin Valley. Central Valley Project was built and still operated by federal government of the US. And recognizing the overdraft situation in the San Joaquin Valley, that's how that project came to be. Then the State Water Project comes in afterward in 1960s and 70s. So we've just gotten past about the 50 to 60 year time frame. That's the department I work for. The essence of the climate change, once again, is the warming climate. It does two things for the state of California. This is all well covered in the morning and throughout the whole day, so I really don't have to spend a whole lot of time on it. The form of precipitation, it used to come in frozen form, snow. It begins to come in watery form, rain. That's troublesome because we are losing natural reservoir. And the precipitation that came in frozen form, snowpacks start melting earlier. California is one of the 5 the Mediterranean region in the whole globe. It rains during winter time. Start out like December, and it stops raining by April. But crops start growing April till August and September. So when crops are growing, there's no precipitation. Sun's out there, sunny California, but you gotta have water to raise crop. So it's an irrigated agriculture, mostly. Irrigation consumes about 70, I heard the number, I think from your talk earlier on, 75%. That's about the number in California also. 75% of the developed water supply goes to agriculture. So there's a lot of similarity that I learned. The other aspects of climate change or the warming climate is the sea level rise. This is not getting debated at all. They are on the rise, and it's a fact. We got to deal with it in terms of one of the speaker talks about groundwater aquifer contamination from salt seawater. With that, we have a problem in California, but with the immediate and direct consequence of sea level rise is our obligation to control the seawater, the salty seawater, try to push it out to the Pacific Ocean so we can continue to do the farming and people can continue to drink and city can get the water supply. That's the projection in the U.S. high emission scenario. We talk about that. These are changing, so I don't need to spend a whole lot of time on it. Water actually is really an essence, the nexus of the human livelihood. So at this point, again, I'm not going to elaborate on it. I did talk about the impacts. The first and foremost would be reduced snowpack and flood control. It caused flood control. High water temperature will have issues in terms of water quality, including the ecosystem. There could be a major fish kill. It happens within matters of few hours. So the time step when you model, it's just got to get down to very fine, smaller time step. And water quality, of course, was talked about. One of the speakers talked about dissolved oxygen. There are bunch of other kinetics that are governed and dictated by the rising temperature. So it is important. At this point, I think I mentioned and talked it over. Again, that's a San Francisco. That's the city of San Francisco. That's a Bay system, and that's the Delta region. And this is, again, just Delta in Bangladesh. They have to go through similar fate as sea level rises. That's a historical record at Golden Gate. So like I mentioned, it's not a projection into the future. It's just a fact. It has risen for the past 100 years to the tune of about 2 millimeters a year. That doesn't sound like a lot, but when you have to deal with the intrusion of salty water with the releases, freshwater releases from upstream stored reservoir, we talk about major quantity of water that's being released as of today, as I speak, to keep that intact. All right, precipitation all over the map, temperature, everybody agrees. So that's what we're banking on. We go through this GCM. People talked about that, so I'm going to skip all of it. And that's the assessment process. You know, you talk about making a coalition and coordinate at all levels of government. Then the impact, vulnerability impact assessment, coming up with an action plan. So to do that, we use models, very elaborate models, to statewide reservoir operation, water allocation, who gets what, should we build a new reservoir, what consequences would it have in view of the changing climate, so on and so forth. Then we have what's going on underground. California gets about 1/3 of its water supply from the groundwater aquifer, so it is important for us to know what's going on unseen underground. And we also have the estuary issue with the sea level rise, very elaborate model dealing with that. So that's the report I sort of conducted and came out in 2006. One's in yellow, those are the chapter 4, system-wide impact as a state as a whole, what's going to happen. What's going to happen with the sea level rise in chapter 5, which is the Bay Delta system. Flood, a lot of speakers talked about flood management. That chapter talked about the flood, how we're going to deal with it, what are the issues we'll be having. ET, we're looking at what's the net effect on the water supply, how much of a ET, agricultural net consumption is going to change. So we look at the whole as a bunch. The vision of water resources planning and management is to make sure the state continue to have vital economy while maintaining good and healthy human and natural environment so people could have a high standard of living. And we do integrated regional planning that is encouraging people to get together with their neighbors, talk it over, solve problem locally and region-wide so we can have a bigger picture planning on a statewide basis. And in terms of the tools to get to it would be water use efficiency, protect water quality is very important that we have adequate quality, quantity alone doesn't cut, and while we maintaining the environmental stewardship. So that's my last slide. And I think our job as a scientist and engineers is to come up with a credible information. The information has to be practical, credible, and viable, implementable, all those kind of things, meaning it has to be good information. You can't just change it. Hey, assessment 4 said this, now assessment 5 is saying something else. Sorry, folks, we ought to do something else. If you flip-flop too much, too often, you're going to lose credibility. Then you ought to come up with an action plan, your conservation plan, recycle of water, the overdraft situation, you ought to find a way to stop that and build new facilities. In California, we're still planning on building reservoirs. And the bottom point, which I think it is most important, is to garner the public support. In California, 65% of the people living in the state believe the climate change is a real thing, and we ought to do, we, meaning the collective, we ought to do something about it. So we ought to get their vote so we can get the funding for public project. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you.